unhitched, not unhappy. Whether you're single at this moment or not, at one point you were. Perhaps your single days are telescoping behind you in a narrow, blurry aperture, or flattening out into a glowing portrait that looks differently now that you see it from a distance. Or maybe you're trying desperately to get out of your single state altogether, like a crappy apartment in a bad housing market. But even my few lame guesses at how you feel about having been or being single are essentially reductive. And so right out of the gate, I've done the very thing I accuse our culture of doing, boiling the tremendously complex, layered, interesting lives of single people down to a few extremes. But one thing I don't assume about single people, and I wish no one would, is that we are by definition lonely or sad, simply because we're not married or because we do not currently have a significant other. Sometimes we have several. A few other assumptions I'd like to toss: that we need to be fixed up like a home in disrepair, that we're single because we're too neurotic or too picky or have too much baggage. Some people are, but just as many of them are married as on. Or that we're stuck, marooned on an island of infinite adolescence and foolishly keep waving away offers of help from sea or sky. In short, I don't believe that being single is a problem that needs to be solved. However, the very notion that there are plenty of successful, bright, attractive singles not necessarily looking to settle down is troubling to many, and not necessarily us. A man alone is an eligible bachelor. A single woman presents a conundrum. Why isn't she with anyone? What's wrong with her? Doesn't she want to get married? We are either presumed to be frigid, asexual, or perpetually knee-deep in a martini, guided by slippery morals and utter desperation, ready to suck off the next guy that walks in, whether he's single or not. And grateful for the opportunity, no less. I recently got an angry message from a man on a dating website. When I rebuffed his offer to meet, since he had no picture posted, deal breaker, and I wasn't interested in someone who wouldn't show his face, he wrote back angrily that I might want to turn to page 18 of the New York Post, where I would see that as a 38-year-old woman, I was nearly out of options. I did not turn to page 18 of the New York Post, as I didn't care to see what was there. I am not in the habit of reading the Post, nor do I take reading recommendations from spiteful, nasty faces men I've never met. But I had to laugh. In being rejected, albeit by an older single woman, he felt it necessary to scare me, threaten me somehow with the specter of diminishing opportunities. I would have loved to make a biting comment, but he had incidentally deleted his profile. Looks like he was the one out of options. Of course, these big, old, archaic beliefs have been rusting on the landscape for a long time. In her book, Singled Out, Bella DePaulo, arguably one of the most esteemed voices and advocates of the single lifestyle, uses the term she coined, singleism, which refers to the marginalization and stigmatization of all single people. That's only half the racket, though, she writes. The other half is the glorifying of marriage and coupling, especially the you're my everything variety, which she calls matrimania. In fact, contrary to what you've been told, not all single people have a one-track mind. They're not all 100% focused on finding a partner. In fact, the Boston Magazine cover story, Single by Choice, cites that 53 million single Americans aren't looking to find anyone at all. And yet, of course, many of us are, and enjoy very active, fulfilling, and rewarding sex lives. They just don't happen to do it in the context of a committed relationship. I said single, not celibate. Throughout the book, DePaulo debunks one myth after another about single people, including the one that says married people are far and away healthier than singles. DePaulo spends an entire chapter explaining how, in fact, those studies are conducted and reported, and you'll find that it's not quite as clear-cut as you think. Another assumption is a catch-22 for singles. One you just can't win, says DePaulo. Single people who are strong and unapologetic about it, she says, are believed to be covering up deep layers of insecurity and anger, while those single people who are vulnerable are deemed fragile and in need of coaching, presumably by married people. The reason these judgments fall short, I think, is that because there's just so many single adults, more than ever. By the end of 2003, says DePaulo, there were more than 87 million adults who were single, comprising more than 40% of all adults. Today, nearly 100 million people are single. 61% have never married, 53% are women. There has been a lot written about this, a rash of books and stories and opinion pieces. I'm sure many of you saw Kate Bollock's cover story in The Atlantic called All the Single Ladies, in which she takes us on an eye-opening tour of marriage and its evolution. Not just that it's undergoing now, but has always undergone. She notes how surprised historians are that we have latched on to one idea of marriage, the 1950s version that hatched so recently in human history, yet we have such a hard time letting go of. And so marriage, while an option, and a desirable one for many, is just that, an option. Boston Magazine's senior editor Janelle Nanos, who wrote the single by choice story, now cites that 44% of the millennial generation believes that marriage is obsolete. But the whiplash responses to anyone who claims that the single life has merits is evidence that we're hitting a major cultural nerve. The good news is that there's no one right way to live. DePaulo writes, as all the components of marriage that were once tied together have come undone, the number of possible life paths has multiplied. The promise offered by this brave new world is a nearly limitless array of imaginable life stories, but the promise is also the threat. While singles have so much freedom now to design their lives, she writes, they're also in a difficult position. She writes, the freedom to be single, to create a path through life that does not look like everyone else's, can be unsettling to people who feel more secure with fewer choices. I'm not here to skewer marriage, by the way. My belief is that marriage can be a wonderful or horrible thing, depending on who you are and whom you're with and why. It can be a life choice that's best for you, and perhaps you'd never have it any other way. Maybe you'll do it many, many more times. But it's not for everyone. And just because you're not married now and might like to be, does not mean that your life now does not hold tremendous value and potential. The current issue that I don't have here, obviously, shows me sort of lunging off the cover, making a big, bold-faced promise I never actually made, that I will never get married ever. I have not sworn off marriage. It's just not a priority, and as of now, not all that appealing to me personally. Of course, the magazine editor in me, which I was for a long time, knows that it's a great cover line, so it really did not bother me at all. The punchy absolutism works. It would be better than if it really said, you know, this is Terri, she's 38. She's not really sure if she's going to get married. We probably won't anytime soon, but we'll see. That's not catchy. That doesn't work as a headline. But no, I never promised anyone I wouldn't get married any more than I promised anyone that I would. I guess I should add that while I enjoy being single, I don't think it's anything you must or should commit to. It's true. I may be too non-committal to stay single. My mother once said to me when I was still young and she was still married that she thought marriage forever might not be the best idea. That she sometimes wondered if it made far more sense if marriages just expired after so many years, so that if you wanted to keep it, you'd have to go together to get it renewed. Otherwise, everyone was off the hook. No harm, no foul. Not a conventional thing for a mother to tell her daughter, and not in keeping with the culture's romantic notions of marriage. But it made sense to me. It still does, though divorce lawyers might be seizing up at the thought. Yet I have two happily married sisters who just love being married and plan on staying that way, and I believe that they are thriving in that. My parents have been divorced happily for more than a decade, and while like any divorce, it was an ugly mess when it exploded, in the ensuing years they have healed into one of the most contented divorced couples I've ever seen. My mom talks to my dad almost every day, just about. My dad gets a kick out of buying her greeting cards, happy birthday to my beloved wife, and writing X in front of it. Like Kate Bollock, I decided a while ago not to let biology dictate my romantic life. I know there are single women, many, aching to be mothers and wives, and that keeps them from enjoying single living. I get that. I understand that the desire is an incredibly strong one, even if I happen not to feel it myself. And of course, there's no way to stop wanting what you want. But there's this troubling image in my head of women who see themselves stranded like cars along the shoulder of the road of life, believing that the only way to get their lives started is for a man to come along, stick his key in your ignition, and take you somewhere. Now, I'm not saying it's not a wonderful thing, exciting thing for a man to stick his key in your ignition. In fact, I recommend it. But I wish for all of us to think of ourselves as the drivers of our own lives, not the vehicle that we need someone else to operate. We've become accustomed to the idea that singlehood is not a destination. It's a way station, a platform where you wait to get picked up and whisked off to where everybody else is going. If the train is late, you start to panic. Did I miss it? Is it coming? Is everyone else on it? And I wondered about that too, until I realized, got older and older, that I was secretly hoping the train wouldn't come and that it might be delayed, maybe altogether canceled, and that would have been fine with me. It has become apparent to me, and to many even, that the single state actually, that it isn't the single state, but the paired state that's often transitory. I'm not saying all relationships are doomed, by the way, but often you might find yourself returning to that place. So I'd like to propose an alternate analogy for singlehood, not an empty train platform where your life hangs in limbo, but as a lively little village where you can stay for as long or as little as you like. A place where you can do all the things you want and care to do, and whoever you want to do them with, where you truly can be your best self and explore what that even means. If you cultivate and grow the conditions for happiness yourself, you take them with you rather than leave home empty-handed, believing that someone else will give them to you. I have called this little Singleville home all my life. It doesn't mean I haven't left. I have. I've taken off for exotic locales, occasional sabbaticals, extended lovely vacations, and rich and meaningful relationships that I wouldn't change for the world. But whether they end mutually or weepily, I'm always sort of glad to come home. I've never tried to convert people to be single either. What surprises me, though, is how defensive some married people get when I suggest that the single life has its own, even enviable merits, especially when I would never dream of telling a happily married or coupled person that they shouldn't do what they're doing. And yet, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's been on the receiving end of a sales pitch for matrimony. You know the look. Any single people in the room, I'm sure you do. The head tilt, the narrowing of the eyebrows, and just the sort of poignant arc of concern. You don't want to get married? As if it were a ridiculous question, like, you don't want to drink water? You don't want to eat food or breathe air? And children? Forget it. I've had women whose last names I don't even know ask me if I was sure. You sure, honey? It seems an odd thing to say to a person you just met unless you're asking them if they want another drink. But the fact is, breaking it to people that you may just be happy with the way things are inevitably has a tinny defensive ring to it. I like having my own space. I love my work. I'm really in no hurry. To some people, it sounds just outrageous, as if you just said, I think I might go live on the moon, or, no, I think a face tattoo's a great idea. What I've wanted to respond when asked, why don't you want to get married and or have kids, is something I've never actually whipped out in conversation, but have threatened to. And it's, well, let me ask you, why haven't you gone for your PhD in physics or studied yoga in India? To which the response, I imagine, could be, well, it wouldn't occur to me to do that. It seems like a lot of work for something I'm not sure I'd want. I'm not sure that's for me. Bingo. Sometimes this line of questioning prompts a smug response. You just haven't met the right person yet. I truly believe it's meant as reassurance, but it doesn't come off that way. It sounds like I know something that you don't. I'm ahead of you. It works about as well as telling someone she's gay and doesn't know it yet. Or if she's telling you she's gay, telling her it's just a phase. This is never the right thing to say, ever, ever, even if you believe it. I take issue here with the word right, because it means that there's only one person in your life, only one right person, and that everyone else is wrong. And what a very small way of looking at your life and at love. If you think that, it's no wonder you hate dating. It wasn't until my 30s that I could enjoy dating for what it is. Getting to know people and yourself in the context of another person. Rather than look at this or that relationship as wrong or waste of time, I see many of them as important and worthwhile for what I learned and loved along the way. So you won't hear me complaining about how hard it is to be single, because I don't think the pressure that comes from outside is nearly as debilitating as the pressure we put on ourselves. And that is a choice that we make. What other people think when it comes to your choices cannot matter as much as what you think of them. And if you let that happen, then you're not living your own life, you're living someone else's. When I was in writing workshops in college and grad school, I went to Boston College and then got my MFA at Emerson, I learned pretty quickly that there were people in that class whose advice and insight I'd be interested in hearing, and many whose feedback I'd have to politely endure until the end of the semester. And I knew that not just by the comments on my work, but by the work they created. That was a good lesson. Don't accept or take on criticism from people whose work you don't care for or admire. Look at the people whose lives you love, who love their own lives, whose choices are thoughtful, whose energy is invigorating, not depleting. Your life is your most creative act. I think what most people blame as circumstance is really a lack of imagination. It's what you do with it, not what other people make of it, that determines its quality and enjoyment. In her story, Kate Bollock says, if I stopped seeing my present life as provisional, perhaps I'd be a little happier. Perhaps I could actually get down to the business of what it means to be a real single woman. Single, married, divorced, or otherwise, we all need to see our lives as more than provisional in order to have them mean something to us. It's not commitment to this or that other person that will define the life itself, or that it has to, but the commitment we make to ourselves and our decisions that allows us to get down to the business of living. Thank you very much.